Okay, welcome everybody. I'm just going to do a quick check of the audio. Okay, to make sure. I think we're okay. Yeah, we are. So this will be a very interesting topic tonight because this is going to feed in the next kind of stream I'll do. We'll kind of take this further, and we're going to bring it up to kind of current events in Ireland. And in order to do that, I think it's really good to do some background dig. And tonight we're going to talk about this thing called the Open Government Partnership. And this is really a cornerstone of sustainable development. And you're going to learn basically where it kind of evolved out of. And it has deeper roots maybe than are immediately appreciable. Tonight's stream will be, I don't know, we'll aim for an hour, but it could go longer. I don't know. I've tried to improve the tech as well, so we should have better performance overall for the tabs and the smoothness of the stream. Every week we'll try to do a little bit more. So I've put this out on Twitter and on Telegram, and so hopefully a few people will file in as we go on. So before we to get going here, I'm going to introduce what this is from their own mouth. Basically, here's a little clip from the Open Government Partnership, which introduces the whole concept. Hopefully, this will come across well.
What will it take to solve the biggest challenges of our time? What will it take to include everyone's voice in how decisions are made? We need an idea that's bold and ambitious, with people at its heart. That idea is open government. An open government is transparent, inclusive, participatory, and accountable. So governments don't just serve themselves, they work with citizens both in and out of government to develop smarter policies and improved services that make things better for everyone. And we all get to see how decisions are made, ask questions, and hold power to account. People like you are using the Open Government Partnership to create and implement thousands of initiatives that are transforming societies around the world. Open budgets and contracts are ensuring that money isn't lost to corruption. Having a say in public services has let citizens shape the communities they live in. Equal access to the justice system and public information is open to everyone, especially the most vulnerable. The potential of technology is harnessed while safeguarding against digital threats. And our fundamental freedoms are strengthened, letting us voice our needs and concerns safely. OGP provides a platform for reformers to co-create solutions, monitor progress, and share knowledge with peers across the globe. But for this to work, we need more reformers in government to open new doors, allies outside government to help find ambitious solutions, and partners around the world to support these efforts. We need you. Join us in building a better, more open world.
Okay, so there you have it. That's what they kind of marketed as that. This is some of the, you always know when you see those kind of flat cartoons with the diversity, DEI, and the really woke kind of signaling, you know, that you're kind of dealing with here. But there's certain themes to this which are notable, which are going to become more apparent. So you have diversity, you have this idea that we're going to, you know, there's environmentalism, sustainable development. There's also multiculturalism, and there's technology. So a lot of this concerns technology and using technology to control and make government more quote unquote accountable and all the rest of it. But as we'll see, the Open Government Partnership really is about civil society taking the place of people, really. And so we'll explain how we get there anyway. So I have a few interesting diagrams and stuff. I've been trying out some different tools, like I say, this week. So the Open Government Partnership really officially really launches in the Obama era. And so as part of the research for this, we have to go back to that time. So here is a little diagram just explaining kind of the basic structure here of the people who were really, well, some of the main people who were kind of designing this program. So, and we're going to profile some of these people tonight. So hopefully that's pretty legible, but we'll just move along the graph here. So One of them is Cass Sunstein. You may have heard of Cass Sunstein. He's famous as being the author of that famous idea, the nudge, the idea of using nudges to basically, manipulate public behavior for your own interest, of course. And he's got kind of very influential in the Obama administration, basically. So when Obama came in 2008, well, he in 2009 he started, and he hit the ground running. And we're going to explain basically how this whole kind of thing kind of crystallized. And so Sunstein will be central to all of this. He was in the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs within the Office of Management and Budget, which was controlled by this guy called Peter Orszag. And Peter Orszag is another very influential. These are all very eminent people in their own fields. They're all still active today. They're very, very influential. They're in either foundations. They're in places like the Harvard Kennedy School or Stanford or whatever. And he was the kind of main driver, I would say, of a lot of what was going on institutionally. And so he was in the Office of Management and Budget as the director of that. And this is when, between 2009 this is when they really were creating what became the Open Government Partnership. Another person is this Anish Chopra. We'll profile him. He was the US Chief Technology Officer while this was being created. And again, very important individual. He focuses on tech, and he collaborated with Sunstein, basically. And then there's another character here, another Indian, actually, Indian American called Vivek Kundra, and we'll profile him. And he was the Federal Chief Information Officer between March 2009 to August 2011. And he is the primary architect of this thing called data.gov. So a lot of this is about making government transparent, and so there's a lot of like public interfaces with the what the government is doing, and they have to, there's some of this actually sounds pretty plausible, pretty good, but as we'll see when you kind of follow it through, it does have it's actually foundational to how sustainable development is managed through stakeholders. And I've got news for you: you're not a stakeholder. So, and then of course we get to Samantha Power, who was Irish born. She is married to Cass Sunstein, and she of course had a number of very prominent roles. She really launched this effort through the United Nations, basically, because she was the US ambassador to the UN up until from 2013 to 2011, and she led the co-founding and launch of the International Open Government Partnership with Brazil in 2011, which was done, like I said, in the UN. And we'll get to all that. So that's kind of a schematic of what we're going to be looking at tonight. Some of the characters, and there's a few more as well that will come up as we kind of move on here. Okay, so this is a memorandum that was, as soon as Obama came in, basically in 2009, he basically issued this memorandum, and he said basically government should be collaborative. Collaboration actively engages Americans in the work of their government. Executive departments and agencies should use innovative tools, methods, and systems to cooperate among themselves across all levels of government and with non-profit organizations, businesses, and individuals in the private sector. So if you're familiar with people's analysis of institutions like the World Economic Forum, they talk about stakeholder capitalism. Well, this is basically what this is, and we'll link them all together towards the end. But basically, you're talking here about stakeholders, and the stakeholders are institutional. And so if you want to engage in this process, you have to become a stakeholder. And to become a stakeholder, you have to have an institution in order to integrate into this system. And without that, you can't really get in. So yeah, he says executive departments and agencies should solicit public feedback to assess and improve their level of collaboration and to identify new opportunities for cooperation. So like I said, a lot of this, they'll have public portals in which they'll solicit your opinion. They'll email you about initiatives or whatever. But as we all know, people generally don't use these things, and no one is obligated to take your opinion seriously either anyway. So what this really is this is the kind of stakeholder kind of model of governance, where government is kind of a stakeholder along with other institutions, and that is how governance is actually done. And he says, I direct the Chief Technology Officer, the aforementioned, in coordination with the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, that's Mr. Orzak, and the Administrator of General Services to coordinate the development by appropriate executive departments and agencies within 120 days of recommendations for an open government directive to be issued by the Director of the OMB that instructs executive departments and agencies to take specific actions implementing the principles set forth in this memorandum. The independent agency should comply with the Open Government Directive. And so that was the kind of soft launch of Obama's, or the serious launch, I suppose, of the process to getting the Open Government Declaration, which is an international declaration. This is what Obama began his first executive order, basically. One of them was to do this. So that brings us to the actual Open Government Directive. So in December 2009, so this is Peter Orzag writing. He says, in the Memorandum on Transparency and Open Government issued in January 2009, the President instructed the Director of the OMB to issue an Open Government Directive. Responding to that instruction, this memorandum is intended to direct executive departments and agencies to take specific actions to implement the principles and transparency of transparency, participation, and collaboration set forth in the President's memorandum. This directive was informed by the recommendations from the Chief Technology Officer, who solicited public comment through the White House Open Government Initiative. Okay, so this is the process kicking into gear. Obama writes to him, and he creates this directive, which we're not going to analyze particularly. But for now, that's the process unfolding. Okay, so here is the this is a summation of all of that. And so that culminated then, that process culminated in 2011. Then the administration expanded its support of open government efforts when President Obama launched the Open Government Partnership at the UN General Assembly, with meeting with 7 other heads of state. US efforts with the Open Government Partnership are set forth in biennial Open Government National Action Plans that detail specific and measurable open government commitments. And as we'll see in the next stream, we'll analyze Ireland's own plans. We have national action plans. They're very, no one really talks about them, but we have them. They exist. And we are part of this system since, I think it was 2013 we joined. So we weren't one of the initial countries to join. But this process that was designed by the Obama administration and this cast of characters who we're going to kind of discuss tonight, this is one of the key ways in which sustainable development, or the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, is basically administered through governance structures in this country. And it's a stakeholder forum, basically.
Thank you so much. I wanted to get everyone together on the first day to welcome you to the White House. From our vantage point yesterday, you couldn't help but be inspired by the sight of Americans as far as the eye could see. They were there because they believe this is a moment of great change in America, a time for reinvigorating our democracy and remaking our country. They've entrusted all of us with a great responsibility. And so today, I'd like...
So he's talking about remaking democracy. He's talking about restructuring, basically, how things are done. This is actually very significant, and it's not really appreciated what this means.
I'd like to talk with you about our responsibility to keep that trust. In a few minutes, I'm going to be issuing some of the first executive orders and directives of my presidency. And these steps are aimed at establishing firm rules of the road for my administration and all who serve in it, and to help restore that faith in government without which we cannot deliver the changes we were sent here to make, from rebuilding our economy and ensuring that anyone who's willing to work and find a well-paying job, to protecting and defending the United States and promoting peace and security. However long we are keepers of the public trust, we should never forget that we are here as public servants, and public service is a privilege. It's not about advantaging yourself. It's not about advancing your friends or your corporate clients. It's not about advancing an ideological agenda or the special interests of any organization.
Of course, this is actually, this is kind of marketing spin, really. What we're talking about here is this process is designed really It can't really work without kind of corporate interests and everything. And what he's not explaining really is that there is an agenda here, and it really is a progressive type of agenda where everyone kind of collaborates in a kind of a system which is not necessarily controlled by the government, but which is about stakeholders basically self developing ideas and initiatives. So it's inherently a level of control beyond the state, really.
Public service is simply and absolutely about advancing the interests of Americans. The men and women in this room understand this, and that's why you're here. All of you are committed to building a more responsible, more accountable government. And part of what that means is making sure that we're spending precious tax dollars wisely and cutting costs wherever possible. During this period of economic emergency, families are tightening their belts, and so should Washington. And that's why I am instituting a pay freeze on the salaries of my senior White House staff.
Okay, it's enough of Obama anyway. He really was. I haven't sped up there to 1.25, and he still doesn't sound like he's speaking particularly fast. But so this brings us then to the architects of this plan, and then we're going to get into the significance of it all. So here is one of the main guys. This is Peter Orszag. He is the guy in the Office of Management, which Obama wrote to basically to kind of kickstart the whole fucking thing, basically. So he in the 90s, he's a PhD in economics. He was a Marshall Scholar, which is an important kind of like a Rhodes Scholar at the London School of Economics. And then between the 1990s and 98, he was a staff economist and senior advisor and senior economist, Council of Economic Advisors in the Clinton administration. Between 1997 and 1998, he was special assistant to the president for economic policy in the Clinton administration. In 2001, 2007, he was a senior fellow and deputy director of economic studies at the Brookings Institution, and the Brookings Institution is one of the main progressive think tanks, basically. This is like, there's very little more important, actually. Brookings is very important. It goes all the way back, actually, to the early 20th century. It was founded by a guy called David Brookings. I think his name was David Brookings. And Brookings Institution is very much concerned with this kind of process that we're talking about here, in which industry and stakeholders basically collaborate to basically direct society and direct the economy and manage society in that way. So it's about managerialism. He's involved with the Aspen Institute. That's a very important institution in regards to the advancement of sustainable development and the idea of climate change effect and how it should affect public policy. That's a very important forum. He was the director of Congressional Budget Office under 2007 2008. That was under Bush. Between January 2009 to July 2010, he was the director of the Office of Management and Budget. That's the Obama admin. This is the role in which he was really, really important. He's the CEO, current CEO and chairman of Lazard, which is a huge financial institution, obviously. And Orszag was welcomed as the newest member of the CIC steering committee in September 2014. Okay, so that's kind of my graphic bio, kind of trying to visualize some of this data. We don't want to bore people with too much data, but just to kind of give some more live sources about all of this. So this is the World Economic Forum, measuring stakeholder capitalism towards common metrics and consistent reporting of sustainable value creation. So they have their own metrics basically for this. And some people, there's different names for it basically. It's associated with ESG indicators, environmental, social, governance indicators basically. So these are some notes I take. They're not actually highlighting, it's a shame. But so they describe this this whole kind of formula we're talking about. The principles of stakeholder capitalism, championed by the World Economic Forum for half a century and recently restated in the Davos Manifesto of 2020, have never been so important. The Forum's International Business Council is at the forefront of this rebalancing of corporate purpose. In 2017, the IBC spearheaded a commitment from more than 140 CEOs to align their corporate values and strategies with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals to better serve society. There is an emerging consensus among companies that long-term value is most effectively created by serving the interests of all stakeholders. And a lot of people go on about the World Economic Forum. They kind of center it at the center of all of this. I just think it's one of the institutions that's important, really. There's a whole, it's about networks, really. And it's kind of more about a paradigm. It's a paradigmatic type thing. And they say this work defines a set of stakeholder capitalism metrics. So they've developed this thing called stakeholder capitalism metrics, and there's 4 of them. And they're a bit like the SDGs. There's like 16 SDGs or whatever. But basically they have 4 principles basically, and they kind of encapsulate the same thing. So they're working towards the SDGs really. And disclosures that can be used by IBC members to align their mainstream reporting on performance against environmental, social and governance indicators and track their contributions towards the SDGs on a consistent basis. Okay, so that's kind of what we're talking about here. So you have the WEF, there's that kind of side to things, and then there's other initiatives that ORZAG is involved with as well. So in addition to the Aspen Institute, like I say, he was a Marshall Scholar, and this is kind of I thought this was worth discussing because this goes all the way back actually to the kind of Anglo-American relationship that was created after the war, basically. And so in the early 1950s, as countries were navigating, it's a bit like the Rhodes Scholars, basically, were navigating the political dynamics of the post-war world, the UK was eager to retain and strengthen its close association with its wartime ally, the US. The US had recently gifted Europe a massive amount of foreign aid through the Economic Recovery Program, better known as the Marshall Plan. The UK Foreign Office wanted to send a thank you. Eventually, after considering competing proposals such as gifting an original copy of the Magna Carta and sending chandeliers for the newly republished White House, the Foreign Office settled on an idea to start a UK scholarship program for American students. The man who proposed the idea, Sir Roger Mellon Matkins, then Deputy Undersecretary of State, suggested the scholarship be named after the aid program's namesake, General George C. Marshall. We've all heard of him. But basically, these scholarships were created basically a bit like the Rhodes scholarships, like we discussed last week, and they have the same objectives basically. This is kind of where you create your foreign policy establishment and you kind of align their values basically by training them. So this is kind of ORZAG's kind of background. This is what he was kind of brought into, and so he's also, interestingly, in the research for this, I discovered ORZAG is also involved in this institution, basically, called the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, and this is Pope Francis, now deceased, basically writing to these members because he was involved in this initiative. So here is his address from November 11, 2019, to the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. And he says, I extend a cordial welcome to each of you gathered for this meeting of the members of the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. And then what I wanted to highlight from this, it is true that business is a noble vocation directed to producing wealth and improving our world. It can be a fruitful source of prosperity for the areas in which it operates, especially if it sees the creation of jobs as an essential part of its service to the common good. And that's from Laudato Si. However, as my predecessor, St. Paul the Sixth, reminds us, authentic development cannot be restricted to economic growth alone, but must foster the growth of each person and of the whole person. That's from Popularum Progressio, another encyclical. This means more than balancing budgets, improving infrastructures, or offering a wider variety of consumer goods. Rather, it involves a renewal, purification, and strengthening of solid economic models based on our own personal conversion and generosity to those in need. An economic system detached from ethical concerns does not bring about a more just social order, but leads instead to a throwaway culture of consumption and waste. On the other hand, when we recognize the moral dimension of economic life, which is one of the many aspects of social doctrine of the church that must be integrally respected, we are able to act with fraternity, charity, desiring, seeking, and protecting the good of others and their integral development. So this initiative is really interesting. Some people have talked about this because the Council for Inclusive Capitalism was actually created by Lynn Rothschild, and he's a member basically. There's his bio from the website, and there's an interesting little thing here actually on the website as well. So here's the background basically. The Council for Inclusive Capitalism, this is the story of it basically. So in 2012, a task force under the leadership of Dominic Barton of McKinsey, which is the big financial consultancy firm, basically business consultants, Dominic Barton of McKinsey and Lady Lynn Forrester de Rothschild of L. Rothschild explored the reasons for why capitalism was under siege by the public, particularly young people. This study led to the decision by certain policymakers and investment and business leaders to create a global organization dedicated to the reform of capitalism through innovative public policy, business and financial practices, and media outreach. The goal of the inclusive capitalism movement is to make our economies and societies fairer and stronger, or in the frame of Martin Luther King Jr., to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. So then in 2020, the Council for Inclusive Capitalism was established in response to Pope Francis's call for action, uniting leaders managing 10.5 trillion in assets and 200 million workers across 163 countries. The organization's members mapped their commitments to action against frameworks for change, including the SDGs and the World Economic Forum International Business Council's pillars for sustainable value creation. So those are the 4 pillars, which themselves are kind of aligned really around the SDGs. So the SDGs predate this. So collaboration among the council members has been key to advancing these goals, with leaders from diverse sectors working together to address systemic changes and drive meaningful progress. Beyond these milestones, advocacy by think tanks such as the Milken Institute, he was a famous economist, and influential figures like Lynn Rothschild, Bill Clinton, and Pope Francis helped bring inclusive capitalism into mainstream discourse. And then they talk about the anti-woke sentiment, which is kind of affecting things. But the point is, this is a large movement, and you can see the people who were talking here: the presidents of the Ford Foundation, Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase, CEO of PayPal, Dan Schulman, etc., and it's Tata and everything. These are big international figures, and they're all kind of geared around this. So, Peter Orszag basically been involved with this. He is a very key kind of figure in all of this. And so here's an interesting clip I came about. Just
Build a website you love with Wix. For your words.
Yeah.
I'd love to do a little bit back to the future as we talk about climate. And I think of 2015. You were in government and you were governor of the Bank of England. The Sustainable Development Goals were agreed. The Paris Agreement was agreed. Pope Francis gave us the Laudato Si, imploring us to care about the earth and the poor. You started TCFD with Mike Bloomberg. That was 2015. Tell us your view of the progress or lack thereof since then, how you feel now versus how you felt then.
Well, I feel that a tremendous.
And of course, this is Mark Carney, who is now the president of the Prime Minister of Canada.
I'm very conscious, as I think we all are, that the level of clean energy investment has been going like that. It needs to keep going. It needs to keep compounding at incredible rates. So, but a lot of the groundwork began in 2015 and has been laid. And then the question is going to be, how do we amplify it as a society? What's the role of government policy? What's the role of philanthropy? And what's the role of private capital?
So you can kind of see the way they're talking here, like they're aligning capital, society, governance, business, NGOs, basically all civil society, all around these kinds of these objectives. So people who say sustainable development is not a serious thing or whatever, they really don't know what they're talking about, because this is actually embedded in governance structures from the top to the bottom, which we'll describe in the next stream, throughout the world basically, and including in Ireland. So, and it's one of the ways in which all our national action plans, development plans, economic agenda, all of it is situated. So when we discussed the long-term economic planning that's going on in Ireland, everything in there is aligned with this. This is why they're pursuing the green thing so much. This is the alternative energy sources, green energy. This is it's coming from these commitments that have been made at the top level. So I won't bore you with Maura Carney, but she speaks to ORZAG.
Power, as well as its weaknesses. If you could write the policy that would turbocharge the capital markets, because we know that they are the greatest force for change. When we get the capital markets moving in a direction, change happens. And the Council for Inclusive Capitalism really focuses on reform of the capital markets. But specifically with the climate agenda, if you could write and get through the politics, and that's a big if, what would your best policy ideas be?
Well, let's first start with the key point you made, which is when there is a financial return to something, capital markets flow dramatically in that direction. And we've done some original research. There is a penalty to emitting, all else equal, within a sector, controlling for everything else, to emitting more rather than less. Your price earnings ratio is lower, or your other metrics of firm value. But on average, the effect is very small. And so it's there, but it's just not sending a very potent signal right now. What will really unleash the capital market is to send a more powerful signal. So then the question becomes, how do you do that? Now, your question was a little bit of a cheat, because if I were able to write whatever I wanted to
without politics,
you're waving away all of the real world constraints.
Okay, so basically he's talking about realigning capital basically, and affecting the incentives basically. So if you get capital, financial markets basically flowing behind all this, you have a kind of an irresistible force at that point. So that's ORZAG, and that's kind of his world. That's the world he inhabits. We'll return to him, but basically, and his role, but basically that's what he's involved with that. And he is really the guy who kind of managed this process, I would say, the most hands-on through his role in the Obama administration, the Office of Management and Budget. And then, of course, we come to another figure, which is Anish Chopra. Is he Indian born? No, he was born in America, but he was born he's of Indian background. And Chopra is again, he's a product of the Harvard Kennedy School. This is an overlap you see all the time, actually. They're always involved in the Kennedy School. And so between 1997 to 2006, he was the managing director of the advisory board company, which is a healthcare think tank. He was hugely relevant to the creation of Obamacare, which also came out of that Obama administration. And from 2006 to 2009, he was Secretary of Technology in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And then he basically was picked up to do this at the national level. So in 2009 to 2012, he served as the U.S. Chief Technology Officer, the first ever Chief Technology Officer. So they created a new role for him. And so he was assistant to President Obama. He did a number of these blue button, green button initiatives, basically about highlighting health data, energy data. So he's really into technology and using technology to basically bringing it into government. And he did all those different initiatives, basically. And then these days he hangs out at the Walter Shorenstein Media and Democracy Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School. And he is known for, he wrote a book called Innovative State, How New Technologies Can Transform Government, which I've had a look at. I don't think I have it pulled up here, but no, I do have it pulled up actually. Let's have a look at. Yeah, he wrote this book basically, and it's there's a lot of these books going around, actually. A lot of the people we're talking about here, a number of them have books very similar to this. Cass Sunstein has books like this. And the relevance of all of this is that they overlap a lot. And it's not just like Klaus Schwab or whatever kind of thinking this kind of way. This is really a kind of an elite paradigm in which people think a certain way. And it's a very progressive thing. It's very much linked to the American progressive way of doing things. There's a kind of an optimism about it. But ultimately, it's about large institutions basically directing the development of society. He talks about open data. He's got chapters on open data standards, and then he talks about his experience in Virginia, what he did in Virginia. And we also have his Wikipedia, just to give you a quick look at the guy. And there he is, Sunish Paul Chopra, first chief technology officer, basically, then in Obama. He was under Tim Kaine in Virginia. He was the guy who ran with Hillary Clinton in 2016. People will remember that. He's now part of it was in 2015 he joined the Albright Stonebridge Group, which is Madeleine Albright's consultancy or whatever. There it is. If you know anything about her. And of course, yeah, Kennedy School again. Yeah. So that's him. He's another key feeder into this whole plan, basically. He did a lot of the technical work on it, which became the Open Government program in the end. But another Indian actually was involved in this is this guy called Vivek Kundra. And again, another technology guy. He was in the Obama administration. He was the first ever U.S. Federal Chief Information Officer. So they created an information officer and a technology officer, basically. So they're very interested in technology, bringing that into governance, basically. And later that definitely would feed into things like blockchain initiatives and what he calls here e-government and IT. Launched data.gov 2009, which was later adopted by 21 countries. I think that was actually very similar to what they did in Britain as well. A key architect of the US Open Government Initiative, which is the key kind of thing we're talking about here. So he did a lot of work on this program. So again, Brookings Institution comes up again, joint fellow at the Harvard Berkman Klein Center and the Shorenstein Center. Member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a U.S. founding member of the Open Government Initiative. And again, his work was very influential to it all. And he is widely regarded as the father of federal cloud computing, pioneered open government data movement globally. And then we come to the figure of Cass Sunstein. Now, Cass Sunstein, you may have heard of before. He kind of has become pretty well known for his association with the concept of nudging. He's one of the more interesting characters here, really. He's very active. He's prolific, actually. He's written like hundreds of articles and books. Sunstein, this nudging concept, co-developed with Richard Taylor, described as a liberty-preserving interventions, basically, choice architecture that steer people toward better decisions without banning options or big incentives. I actually have a conspiracy theory that Cass Sunstein may have been involved in changing how conspiracy theories, because he wrote a lot about conspiracy theories, and he wrote a very famous article, which I should have pulled up. Actually, it's a shame, but I won't. I don't want to go off track here. But he wrote a whole thing about conspiracy theories, really, and I think he could be one of the main people responsible for how society has become so crazy with conspiracy, junk conspiracy at this point. But that's more my own opinion. I can't prove that. But he's an interesting character, very influential intellectually. So one of the examples of this nudging concept is the default auto enrollment into 401k plans, like pensions, basically, placing healthy food at eye level, disclosure of information. Libertarian paternalism helps people while preserving freedom. That's kind of debatable, but global impact that he had. Then he inspired 400 plus nudge units worldwide, influenced the UK behavioral insights team, and of course US policy. Now there's actually a whole stream I could do about Sunstein and just his influence through behavioralism and this thing called the Behavioral Insights Lab in in England, which is which is like the partner institution of the behavioral insights team in America. So there's an Anglo-American thing going on again here, where you have like these institutions basically were very focused on nudging behavior and kind of steering people without having an overt authoritarian type structure. So here's some of his books then that he wrote on nudging. AI is brilliant, isn't it? Because I can summarize so many things in a visual graph with this. It's so handy. So in 2008, then Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness with Richard Taylor. Like I said, that's a bestseller. And then 2014, Why Nudge? The Politics of Libertarian Paternalism. 2017, Human Agency and Behavioral Economics, Nudging Fast and Slow. 2025, his new book, Nudges and Nudging, A User's Manual. So I'm seeing a theme. I'm seeing a theme here. Call me a conspiracyist, but big into influencing your behavior in a kind of friendly, paternal kind of way. So in the Obama administration, anyway, he was a very big figure, and he actually knew Obama at the University of Chicago. There's a whole history with Chicago you could go into, actually, about Chicago as like this kind of archetypal modern university, like almost like a polytechnic, but not really a polytechnic. But a lot of the stuff in the 20th century, a lot of the kind of radical kind of ideas and all, a lot of it actually is associated with Chicago. There's a very socialist aspect to it. And of course, at Chicago, Obama got to know Sunstein, and he also, of course, knew Bill Ayers and from the Weather Underground and all, who were also influential upon him. So this is like his Chicago crew that he brought with him into the White House. And so from 2009 to 2012, he was the administrator of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs within Peter Orszag's OMB, Office of Management and Budget. He oversaw federal regulations, cost-benefit analysis, saved 150 billion net benefits in first term, more than Bush and Clinton combined, allegedly. I don't know about that. I'm not sure what that refers to. Promoted smarter regulations, regulatory look back, simplification, applied nudging, automatic enrollment, etc., like we discussed, basically. So you see that in Ireland right now. Actually, when they introduced the organ donation program there recently, you were auto enrolled into it. You have to physically remove yourself from it. You have to physically call them up, and there's a process you have to go through, and it's made just a little bit hard. It's just a little bit hard to undo it, And so much of the modern world is like that, isn't it? Like you get introduced to something, and you basically are kind of, you realize, oh, hang on, it's so much harder to just say no when I could just say yes, And so people like Sunstein are really responsible for making the world that way. And so another post-Obama, he has some very interesting roles, actually. One in particular, which will blow your mind. But in particularly, he from 2020 to 2022, i.e. during the COVID era, he was the chair of the World Health Organization's Technical Advisory Group on Behavioral Insights and Sciences for Health. And so I rarely saw people talk about Sunstein during that period, which I found amazing, because to me, that was the much more interesting angle on COVID, is this kind of psychological aspect of it, and how policy was being kind of influenced, and how people were being manipulated to kind of believe certain things, and how the options were just made a little bit harder. It was just made a little bit harder to say no, to opt out. It's like you have to go to all this effort, and well, it's not illegal to say no. It's technically it's not illegal, and and all those articles came out, and people were saying, well, technically you weren't stopped from saying no. I mean, you just had to say no, and of course that's true, because those of us who said no, we still lived our lives. But it was just, they know that the vast majority of people just will not say no. And so this is the power of this kind of psychology and approach. You kind of you weaponize people's ambivalence and lack of interest in the outcome to basically say, sure, whatever, I don't mind. So that was a very important role that he held. We'll return to it in a second. He's a member of the Defense Innovation Board at the Department of Defense, member of the President's Review Board on Intelligence and Communications Technologies, and he advised the UN, European Commission, World Bank, and many nations. Okay. And he's married to Samantha Power, who we'll do a bio on in a minute, but she was the person who really moved the Open Government Partnership through the UN, through the UN basically, and got all these nations on board with it, teaming up with Brazil, and then eventually all of our countries are signed up to it basically, and it's administering our management of sustainable development by the UN basically. So he's a prolific author. Okay, and of course she was the ambassador to the UN and a USAID administrator. And of course, you all know the story with USAID in the last couple of months, all the different things that have been coming out. But that is a major node in international relations. So anyway, moving on from Sunstein, his graph there. We'll just look at some of his some little bits about him here. So here's the bio from the Harvard Law School. So he's a lawyer basically. That's what he kind of, and a psychologist. Yeah, we don't need that. We're kind of repeating ourselves. Sorry. And this is the thing with the WHO. So this is the describing this committee that they created. So the WHO put out this call for these experts like Sunstein to basically come in and make this kind of committee. And I think that is such a fascinating thing to think about, to really kind of, I wish people had focused on that more, actually. Fascinating thing. And here is his wife, Samantha Power. She's Irish born. And interesting thing about her, she moved to America at an early age and all that. But the interesting thing about her actually is her mentor. So I read her what do you call it? Her biography, her memoirs or whatever, years ago, back in 20, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I suppose. I can't remember exactly. She is a famous author as well. This is the thing, and like her career really is quite remarkable when you look at it. So her main mentor early on in her career, when she was basically straight out of college, basically. So she did, she was at Yale, Harvard Law School, and she's big into human rights, right? So she is famous for kind of being part of this new foreign policy, which was developed during the 90s, basically, which was a little bit more less militaristic, but kind of more about kind of covert operations and kind of a more psychological almost like way of doing things, kind of using proxies and kind of getting involved in conflicts, under the premise that you're protecting peoples and protecting nations and stopping human rights abuses, basically. So basically using the idea that human rights are being abused to justify intervention abroad. And she has this whole book about this, A Problem from Hell, which is kind of one of her, I think that was the bestseller she did actually, or one of them. But her main mentor in those early years was a guy called Morton Abramowitz. And he died last year, but he was hugely influential in foreign policy. So he basically is her mentor. And he was the US ambassador to Turkey and Thailand, I believe. And he and an assistant secretary of state. And after his diplomatic career, he became the president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which goes all the way back to like the early 20th century. One of the philanthropies founded by Andrew Carnegie. Again, we could go on about the history of all this, but a very influential institution basically in foreign affairs. And he hired Power as a researcher and intern post Yale graduation in '92, guided her shift from journalism. So she was a journalist in the Balkans. She followed all that was going on in the Balkan War at that time, and this is kind of foundational to her career. She became famous as this, like, writing about human rights abuses and all. And he basically then guided her shift from journalism to policy, influencing her focus on humanitarian intervention and the Balkans. So kind of creating a new premise on which we need to interfere in foreign countries, in other words. And in her role in USAID in the former Biden White House there that's just gone out, she was very much dealing with Viktor Orban in Hungary. She was very focused on him because that's a long-term strategic, objective of America, is to get rid of Orban. He is not popular with the Americans. And so he was a longtime advisor to her. She dedicated a book to him, credits him for career doors opened and key decisions. She does actually, in her memoirs, she actually describes Martin Abramowitz in great detail and how he basically molded her and opened doors and opportunities for her basically to advance her career. He co-protected her early relationship with Cass Sunstein, with Richard Holbrooke. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so the major concepts, this responsibility to protect, this is what she's associated with. Upstanders versus bystanders in foreign policy, i.e., you have to go in and do something. Strong advocate for humanitarian intervention and prevention of mass atrocities. So that kind of became the new approach, basically, in the Obama years. You know, we are going to interfere, and of course, they became on the Obama years. You had the Syrian situation, all of the North African Arab Spring happened. And this all fed into the Open Government Partnership because these countries then all basically signed up to the Open Government Partnership. So it's all kind of part of what's going on at that time. So she was a huge part of his campaign and everything. She was a senior foreign policy advisor to Senator Barack Obama. From 2009 to 2013, she was the ambassador to the UN. And from 2013 to 2017, she was a member of the National Security Council. And then after that, from 2013 to 2017, she was the chair of the Atrocities Prevention Board created in response to her work. She's the youngest ever ambassador in the UN, U.S. ambassador at the UN. She elevated human rights and atrocity prevention in U.S. foreign policy and led U.S. response to Ebola that was going on in Africa at the time, and then the Syrian refugee crisis and the ISIS atrocities and all that. So the Syrian refugee crisis was huge at the time, actually. The Obama years, towards the end. That's what actually got me really interested in immigration. It really got me to think about immigration in a different way. So in the Biden administration, then she was the administrator of USAID, and she was focused on Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, etc. Led the COVID vaccination distribution. Again, her husband was in the World Health Organization managing the kind of psyops, and she's in the delivering the vaccines distribution. Pioneered climate resilient development, local partnerships, and decolonizing aid. So she's a kind of a major progressive, you know. And then there's the key books: A Problem from Hell, that's America and the Age of Genocide. So she's basically trying to create the narrative that there's this huge problem with genocide and America has to be more involved. It's a bit like a kind of a new neocon type thing, really, in a way. 2008, Chasing the Flame, The Fight to Save the World, Sergio Vieira de Mello and the Fight to Save the World. 2019, The Education of an Idealist, a memoir, named Best Book of the Year. I think she's won a Pulitzer Prize, actually. Yeah, she has. She won a Pulitzer Prize. And yeah, that's her. Okay, we'll just quickly look. And she is then writing then about the new kind of direction, about this new transparency push, basically. And she says, she's highlighting then these new innovations in transparency that they're pushing in the administration are in democratic governance are cropping up on every continent. And some of the ones she highlights in Paris a few weeks ago, 6 new countries from Europe, Africa, Central Asia, and the Middle East met the high standards of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. Now, we're going to explain this is actually the kind of precursor to all of this. This thing was created really by the British and George Soros, actually, and his activism in many respects created this very institution, and this became the model of like a global standard, which basically influenced how they designed the open government program. And so then Brazil and South Africa are pioneering innovative tools to promote budgetary transparency and foster citizen engagement in budget decision-making, along with tens of other countries that are making budget proposals and processes open to public input and scrutiny. Civil society groups are developing mechanisms to enable citizens to keep track of what happens in legislatures and parliaments, including impressive web portals. Okay, and then in his address in September before the UN General Assembly, President Obama hailed open society and open government and called on countries to bring to the United Nations this September their specific commitments to promote transparency, empower citizens, fight corruption, and leverage new technologies. In Brazil, he will welcome the joint leadership of the US and Brazil in a global open government initiative that assembles countries from all over the world and at the stages of economic and democratic development to share their best practices. Okay, so like this, she is kind of guiding this through the UN. Now, here is her mentor, and so we have to mention a little bit about Mort Abramowitz. So yeah, in addition to the Carnegie role, which is hugely important, like I said, he was elected a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He retired from the position in '97, and subsequently he was a fellow of the Century Foundation and director of the National Endowment for Democracy. And if you've, if you should know what that is. That's a very influential kind of institution. It's involved in, regime change. And Mort Abramowitz was a long-time board member of the International Rescue Committee. This is another very influential NGO. And he also played a leading role in the foundation of the International Crisis Group and was a board member. So that's a very important think tank in terms of, inserting American influence basically into these kinds of conflict zones, as is the International Rescue Committee. So a lot of what you see from the US around this in the 90s and the Obama administration is this kind of soft power kind of thing going on. And then his son, Michael, then worked as a journalist in the Washington Post before becoming president of Freedom House. And of course, Freedom House is another one of these big regime change institutions. I don't want to be triggering any algorithms here, but basically, these are all very involved in American foreign policy, and they're very influential people. And the fact that he is her mentor is very significant. And then here is SourceWatch, then a little bit about him. So this is Diana Johnstone's writing about Abramowitz. And so she says, presidents come and go, but the continuity of US policy is ensured by a small elite of policymakers who remain outside party politics and often outside public view. And isn't that the truth? An influential member of this foreign policy establishment is Martin Abramowitz, whose career has involved him with both the Afghan Mujahideen and the Kosovo Albanian rebels. And of course, if you will remember, at that time in the 90s, America was basically supporting the Kosovan rebels, basically, and supporting the Muslims because they were strategically useful, basically, to them. So a lot of Mujahideen had fought in Kosovo and everything. And so they basically took that side because it was a strategic objective of the US in the region to do so. They wanted to basically weaken the Serbs and weaken Russia and everything, and all the rest of it. So in 1986, and as Assistant Secretary of State for Intelligence and Research in the Reagan administration, so he's been in the Reagan administration, he's been in, in the kind of progressive administrations. It doesn't matter. He's always there. Abramowitz helped arrange delivery of the Stinger missiles. The collapse of the Soviet Union obliged US policymakers to redefine the threat justifying foreign intervention. The war on terrorism launched by President Reagan in the early 1980s was suffering by the end of the decade from a dart of active terrorists. As president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in the early 1990s, Abramowitz headed a project to develop a new US foreign policy for the post-Cold War era. Rather than simply identifying threats, especially at a time when few threats could be seen, a successful new policy needed to combine promotion of US interests with proclamation of American ideals. And then she continues, Abramowitz continued to act from behind the scenes as an eminence grease for US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. She's the woman who said basically that all these kids dead in Iraq and all was worth it, basically. There's a famous clip of her saying that. It's unbelievable, actually. He helped found the high-level international crisis group, a chief policy designer for Bosnia and Kosovo. So that was the NGO that basically helped, or think tank that basically helped design what became the kind of settlement. He was omnipresent behind the scenes of the Kosovo drama, both in making policy and in shaping business elite, government, and media opinion. He acted as an advisor to the Kosovo Albanian delegation at the Rambouillet talks, whose programmed breakdown provided the pretext for NATO bombing. And of course, that's when NATO bombed a European country. So this is her mentor. And she was around the region at that time, basically as a journalist, this is the roots of all of this. You see, you have to look at this stuff in a broader context. You have to get the situation in your head before you can really understand what it's all about, So Second, get my screen back. There we are. So another architect of this open government program, open government initiative, was this guy called Jeremy Weinstein, and he again is in the Obama administration, 2009 2017. He is the director for development and democracy, the White House National Security Council. Managed global portfolio on development, democracy, human rights, anti-corruption. He's the key author of Obama's 2010 policy directive on global development. As the principal architect of the open government, he's one of the principal architects of the open government partnership. He conceived the idea to generalize this thing we're going to talk about in a minute, the EITI, multi-stakeholder model, to all sectors of government. And then that was extended through the agreement at the UN. Basically, then it was made into a global partnership, which we're all part of. He worked closely with Samantha Power, Gail Smith, and the Brazilian counterparts in that role. So he was her deputy, basically, in that role. He is the deputy of, or was the deputy of, Samantha Power. Personally convinced President Obama to co-lead with Brazil's President Rousseff, Dilma Rousseff, designed the core OGP features, the national action plans, the 50-50 government civil society governance model. So in the OGP plans, the open government partnership plans, basically, that we're all part of, it's half civil society, half government. So it's very much, we're being led here by a force outside of our government, basically, and we are supposedly represented by the NGOs. And he designed that, apparently. So, and of course, the independent reporting mechanism. He led the bilateral negotiations resulting in the open government partnership launch on the 20th September 2011 at the UN General Assembly. And then after all that, from 2013 to 2015, he was the chief of staff, then deputy US ambassador to the UN under Samantha Power, and he standing member of the National Security Council Deputies Committee. 2016 to 2017, the Obama-Biden presidential transition team, he was part of that as well. Cool. Okay. So again, Harvard Kennedy School, he was the dean there recently. He became the dean of that. This all works differently. I love this app. This is a really cool app to make these maps. So his legacy then on the open government partnership, he is widely credited, including by Samantha Power and the official OGP histories, as the single most influential advisor in the OGP's conception and design. He transitioned the EITI, which we'll discuss in a moment, their sector-specific success, into a whole-of-government global transparency platform, now covering 75 countries and 100-plus jurisdictions. He directly influenced policies affecting millions of refugees and migrants. So he also has this huge role in immigration. And right now, these days, that's kind of what he's working at. We're not going to get too involved in it, but just to give an example of stuff he was doing during the Obama administration, from 2009 to 2011, as the Director of Development and Democracy on the White House National Security Council, he shaped U.S. response to the Arab Spring migration crises. So this was the migrant crisis which flowed into Europe. So he's very involved in all that. That's all going on at the same time as well. He helped integrate migration into Obama's 2010 Global Development Policy Directive. And I think we'll be returning to him at some point, actually, but in another stream. But the NSC is a very important role, obviously. That's US foreign policy. He influenced US positions on UNHCR reforms. That's the United Nations human rights. What's it called? The UNHCR. Can't remember what the document means. But basically, can't remember what it means. I'm sorry, I forgot what the acronym means. Influenced US positions on US UNHCR reforms and early work toward the 2018 Global Compact on Refugees. So the Global Compact on Refugees, again, that would be a great stream to talk about because he's influencing all that. And we are literally dealing with the consequences of that right now because Ireland signed up to these initiatives basically at that time. And that'd be a great stream because we'll be talking about Peter Sutherland and all these guys. So here is the guy himself. And here he explains then basically a little bit about the OGP. So this is what he's doing currently. He's doing all these initiatives at Stanford and everything, but including about immigration. But his policy has focused, his research is focused on political violence and conflict, global development, governance, migration, and technology. Weinstein has paired his work as a scholar and teacher with deep policy experiences, having served in the Obama administration on the NSC and later in the US mission to the UN, where he was chief of staff and then deputy to then US Ambassador Samantha Power. And then he's now back at the Kennedy School, where she is as well. So yeah, he's lived in South Africa and everything, inspired by that. But can you tell us some of the? So he talks here about the what was going on basically at that time in 2009. One of the wonderful things about my career is that I've been able to have a foot in two worlds. In 2009, I was privileged to serve at the White House and the NSC, which is the organization body for U.S. foreign policy. It gave me an opportunity to work on a wide range of issues from global development and anti-corruption to democracy and human rights. Some were persistent challenges, for example, thinking about democracy and human rights in the Middle East, especially as the Arab Spring unfolded. Now, if you'll know anything about the Arab Spring, you'll know that America was very much involved in quarterbacking that whole thing. And this was basically the new strategy, which was they were just going to use these kinds of color revolutions, which they've been using all over the Eastern Bloc basically for the previous 10 years. And Jeffrey Sachs talks about Operation Timber Sycamore in Syria, which was basically to support the Syrian head choppers. And right now, today, our President Trump still is standing in the White House, shaking the hand of one of these people, which demonstrates the continuity of American foreign policy. You know, that's really the message. So, for example, there was so much focus on new reforms, new forms of civic engagement, citizen participation, democratic accountability, and where new technologies could contribute. Working with Samantha Power, formerly a Kennedy School faculty member, and Gail Smith, who both served on the NSC, we designed the Open Government Partnership and put President Obama at the center of an effort with leaders from around the world to think about how we make public institutions work better for citizens. It was launched at the UN General Assembly and is a multi-stakeholder coalition that knits together 70 plus countries, hundreds of cities, and a network of civil society groups working together to help public institutions be responsive to the needs of citizens. I found government to be an extraordinary platform to think about how we exercise power, set priorities, and find new ways to lead. Blah-de, blah-de, blah. And so when Samantha Power was made UN ambassador, she asked me to serve as her chief of staff and then later as her deputy. So very important guy in that process. So now we get to the Open Government Partnership itself and what really it's all about. Okay, so we've kind of explained the bios of these guys, what they are doing, what they're about, what their motivations are. And so I'll get the video of that actually. Yeah, there we go. So here's Obama launching.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Rakesh, for your introduction. It is wonderful to see all of you here today. I still remember your eloquent words when we launched this effort 3 years ago, and I'm very grateful for the role you've played and NGOs have played, and all the leadership that's represented here has played in making this a reality, which is making a real difference in the lives of so many countries that are participating. I want to thank my good friend, President Yudhoyono, for your leadership and the example that Indonesia has tried to set as a country that has transitioned from a difficult past to a full-blown democracy. And I also want to thank Minister Kuntoro for hosting us here today. Both of them have shown extraordinary leadership in this partnership over the past several years. President Yudhoyono this will be the last time I think that we see each other in his official capacity, but not in terms of our friendship. And I think that it's fitting that he's participating here today and leading it because it reflects the legacy of his work. And I also want to acknowledge my dear friend, President Peña Nieto of Mexico, as well as President Zuma of South Africa, who have agreed to lead the partnership in the coming year. I'm thrilled to see so many leaders from civil society, men and women who stand up for equality and opportunity and justice and freedom every single day, and it's not always easy to do. Yesterday, I had a chance to speak about the importance of supporting civil society across the globe, because throughout history, progress has always been driven by citizens who have the courage to raise their voices and imagine not just what is, but what might be, and then are willing to work to bring about the change that they seek. 3 years ago, the United States and 7 other nations launched this open government partnership to represent the other side of that equation, because when citizens demand progress, governments need to be able to respond. And in a new millennium flush with technology that allows us to connect with a tweet or a text, citizens rightly demand more responsiveness, more openness, more transparency, more accountability from their governments.
Yeah, so there he is anyway, discussing the meeting of this, basically, celebrating the 3 years or whatever. So here is the structure. And we can look at a map displaying the structure of the Open Government Partnership, what it actually is all about. So this is a simplified structure, basically showing kind of how things actually work. So you have the participating countries and civil society. So they work a rate basically 50-50. They co-create the national action plans. They're monitored by the IRM, and they can become inactive or face sanctions if rules are broken. Now, formally, there isn't some serious thing that can really happen to you, but there is some sanction. Now, they have these summits, then they're held every 2 years, and they're hosted by a member country. Ireland has never held one of these things, I don't believe. But we do create the national action plans. They're all up on the website, and they are very much pursued, and they're very, very important. So there's the independent reporting mechanism, that's the IRM, which is fully independent and produces progress reports on every country. And you see that model actually in UN institutions all the time. So when you talk about about racism, for example, the UN has a whole program to do with racism and monitoring racism, called CERD, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And Ireland has to prostrate itself, and every other country does, every couple of years, basically. There's a review. And the NGOs create an alternative report to the report that we produce, and that the government would produce. And they'll basically say, no, we're not doing enough. We're not doing enough. So that would make a great stream to talk about all that, because that's kind of how it works. You have this like stick and carrot, so the carrot is the glory of like fulfilling your obligations under the under CERD or under the Open Government Partnership. And then the stick is the sanctions, and the NGOs basically berating you. And the NGOs are they're co-creating the policy with your government. And ostensibly, they'll say that represents the people, right? So the people elected the government, so that's democratic. And well, civil society, sure, you can create an NGO, can't you? You can create an NGO, and you can do your little alternative report, and you have access to all of these structures that we have access to. But you see, the great problem with all of this is that most people just will have no real incentive to do that. They will not feel strong enough about it, because the nudge effect kind of keeps them kind of, well, sure, look, what can I do? I don't have any money. I don't have any capital. I can't I can't get involved in the process. And so they know you won't, so they know you won't get involved in the process. And so then there's 3 subcommittees: equal government and civil society representation. And so again, 50-50, civil society, NGOs, and the government. Government leadership, governments and leadership subcommittee. There's a criteria and standards subcommittee, and there's a thematic leadership subcommittee, basically. There is a support unit with a secretariat, basically a CEO and staff handles daily operations. So that manages the whole thing, basically day-to-day running of the operation. And I think this is actually based in Norway, if I remember rightly. And then there's a steering committee, which is the highest decision-making body. And so that's made up of 11 government members, 11 civil society members. So again, 50-50. Everything is 50-50. Civil society, NGOs, and government members drive this whole process. And then there's 4 rotating co-chairs, 2 government and 2 civil society. And so these original articles, and this is the actual articles of governance, the original articles of governance were adopted by consensus by the OGP Steering Committee in April 2012 and revised in 2014 and 2015 to reflect decisions taken by the Steering Committee. These articles established a mandate and policies for the Open Government Partnership, including the OGP Steering Committee and the OGP Support Unit and the Independent Reporting Mechanism. Okay. And Yeah, this is the actual document. Then you can read them online. They're all there, basically. But I've explained the basic structure of it anyway. So that graph actually explains things very coherently. And so one of the other interesting kind of motivations that's going on here, when this was created around that 2011 time in the UN and everything, what was going on was the Arab Spring. And the Arab Spring, a lot of these countries basically, they actually wound up joining this. Now, Ukraine joined it as well. So a lot of these states in which the US is exerting its influence basically joined the OGP, and they, strangely for a country like Ukraine, they have all this transparent. They're part of the OGP, and yet you can see the scandals that are going on with corruption in Ukraine right now. But anyway, the Arab Spring did not contribute to the OGP, but it provided the dramatic global evidence and political momentum that made the launch of OGP possible and urgent in 2011. In return, several countries affected by the Arab Spring, especially Tunisia, Morocco, and Jordan, used OGP as an international framework to institutionalize some of the transparency and participation demands that protesters had raised in the streets. In short, the Arab Spring was the spark that showed why open government matters, and OGP became one of the institutional responses to that spark. So a lot of these North African countries and some of these these Eastern European countries, they joined pretty quickly, including Ukraine. Okay, so this is a diagram explaining then how the OGP actually integrates with the SDGs in a kind of a formal way. So officially, SDG 16, which is all about peace, justice, and strong institutions, that's the main tie-in. But it actually affects all of them. It reinforces and monitors their implementation of all of them. So the OGP explicitly named in the 2015 UN SDG text. So they actually officially referenced the OGP in the UN SDGs, basically text, as a key delivery platform for SDG 16. So target 16.6, effective, accountable, transparent institutions. Target 16.7, inclusive, participatory, representative decision making. And target 16.10, public access to information and fundamental freedoms. And then there's a formal partnership level as well. And if we can zoom in here, it says 2019, the OGP UN partnership framework signed with UN DESA and the UN DP. The goal is to use the OGP national action plans as primary vehicle for SDG 16 and broader governance targets. So that's that's all condensed from official documents, basically. But that is exactly what's going on, is that the SDGs are basically delivered in many respects and monitored by the OGP process. And then, of course, you have the integration in practice level, which is that 90% of current OGP action plans in 2023 to 2015 explicitly tag commitments to SDG 16. Many countries legally required to align with OGP plans with national SDG strategies as well. So open government supports all 17 SDGs. So SDG 1, no poverty, transparent social registries, participatory budgeting. SDG 3, which is health, open contracting for medicines, health data transparency. SDG 4, education, open education resources, school budget disclosure. SDG 5, gender responsive budgeting and open data on VAWG. SDG 10, reduced inequalities, beneficial ownership transparency. SDG 13, climate finance transparency, public input on NDCs, national development committees. SDG 16, peace and justice, core focus, access to info, anti-corruption, civic space. And of course, SDG 17, which is partnerships. So the OGP itself counted under 17.14 and 17.16. So there's really no doubt about it. This is actually one of the main mechanisms through which sustainable development is basically administered. And then there's institutional bridges. So the UN, the ESA co-hosts annual OGP UN knowledge exchanges. The UNDP technical assistance to 70 plus countries to align OGP plans with SDGs and VNRs. The TAP network, civil society coalition linking OGP and SG16 plus advocacy. And there's the OGP independent reporting mechanism. Since 2021, scores every commitment on SDG relevance. So there's 78 national members, there's 56 local OGP jurisdictions, 5,000 total commitments. 70% of 2023-25 action plans reference at least one SDG. 40 plus countries have presented OGP works in their official UN voluntary national reviews. So they do these reviews, like I said. And then the bottom line then, the OGP is the UN's primary global platform for delivering the governance elements of the 2030 agenda. National OGP action plans have become the de facto implementation mechanism for open government-related SDG targets in most member countries. And next time we stream, we'll explain that process and we'll talk about it in the Irish context. Yeah, that's just some UN material saying similar stuff. Do I have something I wanted to show here? Yeah, so they're actually confirming here that the all of that basically. So it says the Open Government Partnership OGP provides a ready-made platform for helping countries to advance the effective implementation of the SDGs through the adoption of national action plans. These plans promote open government through public commitments made by its 66 member countries. Governments and civil society agree to innovate on public participation. You've heard of public participation networks, I'm sure. Freedom of information, fiscal and extractive resources, transparency, and public service delivery, and open data. And we are supposed to believe that we have the most open data ever. We live in such a free kind of society. I would question that at this point. I don't think that's necessarily the case. Yeah, here's more resources basically then. This is actually interesting. This is about the Ukraine basically. So the Ukraine, in 2019, civil society activists have learned how to engage with implementation of the fourth Open Government Partnership Action Plan, and state bodies have been informed about the new priorities contained in the plan. For the first time, the new Open Government Action Plan in Ukraine has been aligned with the SDGs. To choose new priorities, 60,000 people in 12 oblasts were reached through public consultations conducted by the CSO Hubs network with UNDP support. UNDP supported civil society organizations. Hubs organized 20 public events in 12 oblasts, engaging more than 800 participants. And this is supposed to represent the people. This represents the people. The purpose of these wide-scale consultations was to involve citizens in selecting the new priorities of the OGP action plan. And to inform civic activists how they could contribute to implementation of the newly adopted commitments. The effectiveness of implementation of the fourth action plan depends on all the parties involved in the process. Therefore, I encourage the civil society representatives to actively engage in implementation of the action plan, share ideas with their state counterparts, and challenge them if commitments are not met. And there's no way in hell I'm pronouncing that guy's name. Since joining the Open Government Partnership in 2011, Ukraine has made significant progress at making its governance more transparent, efficient, efficient at extracting money to Israeli dual citizens, perhaps, and accountable to citizens. I mean, it's remarkable, isn't it? Like, how could you read this in the context of what's happened in the last three or 4 years and kind of not laugh? 90% of the first OGP Ukraine action plan for 2012 to 2013 was implemented, as was 83% of the 2014 to 2015 plan. So Ukraine was like a model country for all of this, Yeah, and that explains how they're aligning the different SDGs. We won't waste any more time on that one. But you think you can guess what I think about it anyway. Then this is the Open Government Partnership Achieving Sustainable Development Goals through accountability and transparency. And this is an article summarizing again, it's just more documentation basically are, explaining the OGP SDG integration basically, and how it basically drives the SDGs implementation. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development provides a tremendous opportunity to enhance the impact of the OGP by establishing a set of global priorities, and that's what they're basically administering. Okay. So what is the background to this initiative? So there's actually a deeper background. So officially, it began with the Obama administration in 2009. They issued a directive. But actually, there's this thing called the Extractive Industries, we just mentioned it a while ago there, Transparency Initiative. And this is actually the kind of model for what became the OGP. This is actually what influenced it. And this initiative, it has to do with basically minerals and resources, basically extraction, and agreeing a kind of set of common standards around the world, basically, for doing that. And this initiative was basically led by a civil society coalition, a huge chunk of which was supported by George Soros's Open Society Foundations and Soros personally. And the British government took this on. Tony Blair took this on in 2002 as a big initiative. And so this was actually based in the British government when it was initially established. So we'll have to explain a little bit about this, because this model became what they brought into the Open Government Partnership. And they basically brought it then to the international scale with governments. So one of the kind of things that was going on in the 90s is that there was this big discussion of what was going on with resources and oil, and why are these kind of resource rich countries all over the developing world, why are they poor even though they have all of these resources? And so this report, A Crude Awakening, was produced by this NGO called Global Witness, and there's their Global Witness. And this was one of the kind of institutions that got a bit of support from the Open Society Foundations. And it actually formed a 9-member kind of founding coalition of what became the EITI later on. And so this is the initiative. So the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, the EITI, is a Norwegian-based organization that seeks to establish a global standard for the good governance of oil, gas, and mineral resources. It seeks to address the key governance issues in the extractive sectors. And so if you scroll down here, you'll explain a little bit of the history of this. And like I said, it's Blair era. The Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative was first launched in September 2002 by the then UK Prime Minister Tony Blair during the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, following years of academic debate, as well as lobbying by civil societies and companies on the management of government revenues from the extractive industries. In particular, the EITI was established to be an answer to public discussions on the resource curse, or the paradox of plenty. NGOs such as Global Witness and Publish What You Pay, there was this campaign called Publish What You Pay was created, and again supported by the Open Society Foundation, as well as companies such as BP. So BP rode in behind it. So the NGOs kind of got this going. BP rode in behind it. They said they'd support it. And then the UK government, basically then under Blair, picked this up. And the organization was then subsequently founded at a conference in London in 2003. And there was 140 delegates. And I actually have a little clip from that, actually, in a second. But here then is from the web archive, then from the the EITI website, then basically explaining the history. And so this explains the BP role in this. So the oil companies argued for a shift away from company. There's this bit, there's a bit here. Yes, that's what we were saying then. So there was in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was an expanding library of academic literature around the resource curse by such acolytes as Jeffrey Sachs, Joseph Stiglitz, Terry Lynn Carroll, and Paul Collier. And of course, Jeffrey Sachs is a leading proponent of sustainable development. And now he's kind of gone rogue. He's a fascinating kind of career trajectory with him. He's kind of gone rogue on the Ukraine situation. And detailing how the huge potential benefits of oil, gas, and mining were not being realized and were associated with increased poverty, conflict, and corruption. The problem went beyond just the well-known economic phenomenon of Dutch disease, by which natural resource wealth made other export sectors uncompetitive. Other common effects were around the capturing of the revenues by elites, the stunting of the development of tax systems to capture revenue from the non-extractive sectors, exacerbated regional and community tensions. And so these kind of academic analyses then, this kind of morphed into a kind of an NGO operation. So then the NGOs stepped up their enforcement of corporate social responsibility rhetoric and were looking for a law for companies to report their payments to developing countries in a kind of a public way. And so the civil society campaign slogan of "Publish What You Pay" was drawn from the Global Witness Report, which we just showed, A Crude Awakening, launched in December 1999, and it focused on the opaque mismanagement of oil in Angola. The report had concluded by calling on the operating companies to adopt a policy of full transparency in Angola and in other countries with similar problems of lack of transparency and government accountability. And so then Lord John Brown, then the chief executive officer, CEO of BP, then he basically then explained how he got involved in it. Basically, he had a whole experience with this in Africa. And so they got behind it. And the oil companies argued for a shift away from company reporting as sought by the Publish What You Pay campaign and others to reporting by governments in order to reduce conflict with host governments and put contracts at risk. If company reporting was to be required, they wanted a global effort to level the playing field that required all companies in a country to disclose. So you see how this is becoming a kind of a more globalized kind of thing. And so the UK government then, the Cabinet Office, the Department of International Development, the Treasury, the Foreign Office, and the Department of Trade and Industry was listening both to Publish What You Pay and the oil companies. And so they saw the opportunity to develop an initiative built on the notion of equal transparency from the governments and the companies. And so the EITI is often thought to have been launched in 2002. And it is true that the then UK Prime Minister Tony Blair outlined the idea of the EITI in a speech intended for the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg in September 2002. However, the problematic relationship between Blair and Mugabe in Zimbabwe meant that the Prime Minister never actually delivered his prepared remarks as intended. But I do have a video I'll show you in a second here. And so Blair basically launched this thing, basically. And so, again, the link with sustainable development is clear. And it's at the 10th anniversary. So in 2001 was supposed to be the 10th anniversary of the Rio Conference on Sustainable Development, which occurred back in 91, or in 1992, sorry. Was it 91? 91, yeah. That didn't happen because of 9/11, basically. And so they had to push it back a year. And so it was held in 2002 in Johannesburg as the Sustainable Development Summit. And this brings us to Blair's opening address, which you can read here, I think. Yeah. So here he is. And I actually have the video of this, which I think I'll just watch if we can.
Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And I invite him to the lectern. The Chief of Protocol is requested to escort His Excellency to the lectern.
Mr. President and colleagues, we know the problems. A child in Africa dies every 3 seconds from famine, disease, or conflict. We know that if climate change is not stopped, all parts of the world will suffer, some will even be destroyed. And we know the solution: sustainable development. So the issue for this summit is the political will. We know one other thing. The key characteristic of today's world is its interdependence. Your problem becomes my problem. One country's war becomes another country's asylum seekers. One country's pollution becomes another country's floods. We have begun to act. A decade from Rio, for all the sneering about summits, those who took part then can point to the real progress there has been. Millions more children educated, millions more with safe drinking water, millions lifted out of poverty. Rio, of course, did not deliver everything, Neither will Johannesburg. No summit can. But this summit can and will make our world change for the better. Today, I restate Britain's commitment to play our full part in this. Development for us is a priority. Africa, for me, is a passion. Proud of our leadership on debt relief, we know there is more to do. Proud of the extra resources we are giving to aid and development, we want to give more in the future, and we will. Proud that we will meet, indeed exceed, our Kyoto targets, we know we must do more. There are certain specific agreements this summit can deliver. On poverty, on education, on fish stocks, on chemicals, on sanitation, on biodiversity. But beyond that, this summit has to set a clear direction for the future for our world. We must open up our world trade, and that must include the developed world, opening up its markets to the products of the developing world, especially for agriculture. It then means sustainable and fair development, globalization with justice to ensure that the benefits are spread to every nation in the world. It means driving through the partnership with Africa. I can tell you that Britain will raise by 2006 its commitment to development aid to Africa to £1 billion a year and its overall levels of assistance to all countries by 50%. This is not charity. It is an investment in our collective future. Of course, poverty damages the poor most, but it also deprives the whole of the world of the benefits of the industry and the talent of poorer nations and their people. It also means changing the way we consume resources, particularly energy, and it means the world, the whole world, facing up to the challenge of climate change. Kyoto is right, and it should be ratified by all of us. But Kyoto only slows the present rate of damage. To reverse it, we need to reduce dramatically the level of pollution. And let us at least start to set that direction. Mr. President, none of this is easy. The short term clashes with the long term. There are painful decisions, vested interests, legitimate anxieties. But the facts remain. The consequences on inaction on these issues are not unknown. They are calculable. Poverty and environmental degradation, if unchecked, spell catastrophe for our world. That is clear. My politics, like the politics of many of you, is founded on the belief that we are all of equal worth. Yesterday, in some of the poorest parts of Mozambique, I saw children every bit as bright as children in affluent Britain, full of potential, full despite all the challenges of hope, but their life chances stunted by poor health, poor housing, poor education, poor sanitation. Those children need not and must not face the challenge alone. If Africa is a scar on the conscience of our world, the world has a duty to heal it. Heal it we can and we must. So the decisions taken here will bear directly on the lives of those children. Let us be sure that we make the right decisions. We know the problems. We know the solutions. Let us together find the political will to deliver them. Thank you.
And there is old Tone bringing the house down. The 1-2-3 punch. You know, he's such a good. He really is like the ultimate politician, you know. But the point is, he picked up this whole EITI, and at this summit, basically, it became a real thing. And also, who made? I don't think he actually spoke at this summit. I haven't found the footage if he did. But Soros actually personally wrote this message to the summit if he didn't deliver it himself. And this is the London conference at which they actually created it. And statement by George Soros. Many countries that are rich in natural resources are even poorer than other countries that are less well endowed. They are more likely to be devastated by armed conflict and to be ruled by repressive or corrupt regimes. And so then he talks about this movement then that's created. He says, a broad movement is developing to tackle the resource curse. It was started by civil society and it was taken up energetically by Prime Minister Blair's government. Many oil and mining companies and many other governments responded positively. The need for greater transparency in the management of resource revenues was endorsed by the G8 declaration at Evian, and this high-level conference on extractive industries transparency is another important step forward. So this is the actual conference in 2003 where they basically established it formally. And it will begin to establish new international disclosure standards and advocate voluntary compliance. Both companies and governments will benefit from adopting best practices, and their example will serve as a goal to others. While I support this approach, I am concerned that it should not turn into a sham. The Publish What You Pay coalition that I support favors mandatory disclosure by companies, but that is only the first step in a three-step process. First, publish what you pay. Second, publish what you receive. And third, be held accountable for the way you spend the money. Only the third step will bring material benefits. A voluntary compliance approach may not achieve even the first step. Pressure must be brought to bear by the public and hopefully by the authorities to bring about a change of heart among reluctant governments and companies. That is what Caspian Revenue Watch, so he created this thing called Revenue Watch, this NGO, which is now called something else, which I also support, seeks to accomplish. It aims to build the capacity of civil society through research, training, and partnerships to monitor the collection and expenditure of government revenues from the extractive sector. I am launching a similar effort for Iraq. The governments of the United States and Britain have a unique opportunity to embed the highest principles of transparency and public accountability in that country's important oil and gas sector. So I would say there's a major kind of Anglo-American thing going on here. And so EITI was largely kind of quarterbacked by Britain. And it was set up in Britain. It was set up within the British government, in fact. Whereas the Open Government Partnership, which was modeled directly on this, was basically built by the Americans. And what we got here? Yeah, so this is the live website of the EITI, and they say, building on our common objectives, the synergy between the EITI and the Open Government Partnership continues to grow. The EITI and the Open Government Partnership are close cousins. Both initiatives aim to improve governance and build trust by opening up data and creating opportunities for citizen participation. 30 of the 52 EITI countries are OGP members, and OGP encourages resource-rich countries to join the EITI. OGP countries have made nearly 300 commitments related to natural resources in their national action plans, which Ireland has since the partnership was established in 2011 by Samantha Power at the UN, having been built basically by that team of people I discussed, including Cass Sunstein, Peter Orzag, John Wunderlich, Jeremy Weinstein, and Vivek Kundra, and Anish Chopra as well. So that was the basic team who built that program, and so that's built on this thing, the EITI. And so this diagram basically explains the inputs into the EITI. And so this, I call this origin of the EITI, 97 to 2003, key driving forces. So the main force basically is the civil societies. This is what really got the campaign kicked off. So basically the Publish What You Pay campaign, the coalition, formally launched in 2002, but active from 1999. Founding NGOs were Global Witness, Oxfam, Save the Children, UK, CAFOD, Transparency International. Core demand was mandatory disclosure of payments by extractive companies. Heavily funded by George Soros, Open Society Foundations, $1 to $2 million grants in seed grants between 2000 and 2003. Revenue Watch Institute, created in 2002, personally founded and endowed by George Soros, with $25 million, provided technical expertise that later became indispensable to EITI implementation. So that's the kind of the nuts and bolts of actually achieving this. And Global Witness, of course, then that was a little bit older, exposed that published that famous report on Angola, the Crude Awakening report, exposed blood diamonds and resource-funded conflicts, directly lobbied Tony Blair and the Department of International Development officials from 2001 onward. And I believe Blair that was what actually convinced Blair in a big way actually to support this. And so that's why he took that on. And then it was all set up basically then within the UK government. And so the other two inputs then into the creation of the EITI, which is the model for the Open Government Partnership, are the institutional, multilateral, and they provided legitimacy and early structure. And so you have the World Bank, and President James Wolfensohn endorsed the idea in 2002 as well, hosted technical meetings and pledged implementation support. He helped convince the oil majors such as BP, Shell, etc. to join. BP made the first unilateral disclosure in Angola, triggering backlash but proving feasibility. Shell, ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Rio Tinto, Anglo-American joined in 2003 at the London conference and agreed to the voluntary framework. The G8 endorsed as well. And so the structure then is the governmental level. So basically it's done through the governments. So the civil society and the business basically kind of pushed to create this. And then the governments basically then picked it up. Blair picked it up. And so within the UK Department for International Development, Claire Short served. She was the Secretary of State for International Development from 1997 to 2003. I think she stepped down over Iraq. And she was the early internal champion of the whole thing, basically. And so she personally he was convinced by Global Witness briefings and a Soros meeting. And she announced the EITI on September the 2nd, 2002 at the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg. I couldn't find her speech. Would be interesting. Hosted the inaugural EITI conference in London in June 2003, at which that letter from George Soros was directed to, and provided diplomatic and financial support from 2002 onwards. She co-chaired the first multi-stakeholder conferences in the UK, and Norway, of course, is the center of where it's set up. And so one of the kind of big champions of this as well was this guy called John Wunderlich. And so his role in the OGP ecosystem, key US civil society bridge between the Obama domestic reforms and the global OGP, influenced the standards, ambition level, and parliamentary focus. No formal steering committee seat, but significant behind the scenes impact from 2011 to 2016. He was in this thing called the Sunlight Foundation. And so, yeah, and that was part of the 9 founding member coalition, basically. So Transparency International, Open Society Foundation, Sunlight Foundation, Article 19, Fundar from Mexico, Twaiza from East Africa, and Global Witness and the World Movement for Democracy and the International Budget Partnership. They were the founding NGO members. So the EITI, Ben, that is the model for this open government partnership. And so the timeline then, after that phase that created the EITI, in 2010, then the US State Department then basically their actions to begin exploring an international open government initiative based on Obama's called his directive basically. And then the key players: Jeremy Weinstein, the aforementioned Alec Ross, senior advisor for innovation to Hillary Clinton, and the Brazilian Foreign Ministry. And then you have the first informal bilateral talks, and Brazil and America basically lead the creation of this initiative. There's the early members, 8 countries quietly recruited, the core group, the countries chosen: Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, Norway, Philippines, South Africa, and the UK and US. And on the 19th and 20th of July 2011, there's the official founding conference in Washington, D.C., at the State Department, attended by 46 countries, and 8 countries launch the initiative. Hillary Clinton and Antonio de Aguiar Patriota from Brazil launched it. And the formal global launch then is on the margins of the UN General Assembly in New York on the 20th of September 2011. And Obama and the president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, launched the whole thing.
Thank you very much, and thank you.
That's the wrong one again. No, that's the wrong one. Is this it?
Thank you so much. I wanted to get everyone together.
No, I don't seem to have that queued up. Yeah, that's basically what I had teed up for tonight. So that is the Open Government Partnership. And so we've explained there the origin of basically a global initiative which has developed really from the demands in the early 90s, well, the mid to late 90s, by a coalition of NGOs led by Soros, really, promoted by Soros, George Soros and his Open Society Foundation, picked up by the British government, and then kind of picked up by the team around Obama, including Cass Sunstein, Anish Chopra, Peter Orzag, Vivek Kundra, and Samantha Power in particular, and a few others. And they were able to basically turn this into a global initiative, which Power basically was able to launch with Brazil at the UN. And we are actually part of this initiative. This initiative has an Irish dimension, which is currently underway. We have national action plans, and next stream we're going to really get into what's going on. What kind of things are we kind of committing to? What's being monitored? What are the outputs? Who's involved? What NGOs are involved? So that'll be interesting. I don't know if I'll get to it next week. I'll try to get to it next week. These streams take a bit of work to kind of pull together. I've gotten better technology now. And let's have a quick look at the chat here, actually, because I've been ignoring it because I've been so focused on all this stuff. See Lastru Gale there. He's saying Atlantic Philanthropies funded the idea of the Citizens Assembly here. Absolutely. And push support for gay marriage and abortion. Very much so. Very influential figure in Ireland, yeah. And he's saying that Feeney has an association with EITI. I did not know that. That's actually very interesting. I'm going to make a note of that for the next week's or whenever it is stream, because that would be really interesting. You know, a whole analysis of Atlantic Philanthropies would make a fascinating stream as well. I've got so many ideas actually for streams I'd like to do now. These take a fair bit of time. I'm trying to get it down to a few days to work on these. Aside from all the writing and everything, because it's hard to divide the time, you know, it's hard to get it all laid out. It's hard to kind of do a good job on something. You know, you can't just go live with this stuff, you know. But yeah, that's fascinating. I didn't know about Chuck Feeney doing that. That's really interesting. I've got a theory about Feeney, that Feeney is like kind of an operative, really. My sense. I sense that Feeney is kind of an operative in all of this, with his money coming from Bermuda and his kind of career. Yeah, there's a whole conversation could be had around that actually. But that EITI connection, that's a new one. I hadn't heard that. Very interesting. And Don, put this into a book. I haven't got time to write a book on this. I haven't got time to do that. No way. I'm hard set to get the writing done that I've committed to doing as it is, you know. You really have to like actually writing something down That's the test of how well you know a subject. You think you know a subject until you start to write it down and to try and structure it into an article or a book or whatever. It's actually really hard, and it's a skill you have to work on. You have to always be kind of writing to become a good writer. I've got a lot better since I've been kind of pushing myself to do it, and you benefit from having people read your stuff. But I doubt I'll get to do that. But these streams are a way of getting this kind of information out in a kind of a conversational way in which you kind of show people. Like I'm trying to improve by using these kinds of like AI tools to create these graphs and to summarize vast quantities of research. I mean, next week now, or whenever we get to do the one on the Irish Open Government Partnership dimension, we'll use AI to break down some of these reports and to summarize them. And that's an amazing tool. I think Grok is amazing for that particular job. You can really push through a lot of research very quickly with AI, and obviously you have to be careful because it does hallucinate from time to time. You will get hallucinations. And yeah, I mean, a stream on the citizens' assemblies, that would be another absolutely brilliant stream, actually. And there will be conversations too. I think I'll be doing something with critique soon. That's the plan as well. Maybe that'll be a Twitter space, I think. That'll be on his Twitter. I'll let you know anyway if it comes off. But yeah, this is fascinating. Like these kinds of governance structures, this stuff can be kind of dry. Like I've tried to make it like maybe I overemphasize like some of these levels to it, kind of going on a bit too much. But these kinds of international structures are actually how we're governed. We're actually part. This is what these processes are ongoing all the time. And we talk about politician X. This fella said this fella said that. The minister for this, the minister for that. Ministers come and go, but these guys are always here. These kinds of international structures are always here. And while a lot of this you can, on paper, you would say, oh, that sounds positive, transparency and all the rest of it. I think there's a much more complex kind of argument to be made about the benefit of some levels of this. And if you see a country like Ukraine being a champion of this, and you look at the corruption in that country, I mean, it's incredible, really. So I think a lot of this it's related to geopolitical components actions that are going on. I think the fact that it comes out of American diplomacy and British diplomacy at a time really when they're kind of morphing and changing into this kind of background regime change kind of approach or whatever you would call it is highly relevant. And it's really fascinating anyway. So this is definitely relevant to Ireland, and that'll be the subject for the next stream that we do on this. So without further ado, I will call it a night. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you spending time with me tonight. I hope you learned something, because that's the objective here, is to learn something, come away with a kind of a deeper knowledge and tools to kind of act in the world, to kind of change things, to understand the world we live in. And I will see you next time. Maybe it'll be in a stream, or maybe it'll be in a space. But regardless, take care, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.